Hello, welcome to Wild Connections presentation. John, please tell us what's going to happen.
Oh, yes, here I am. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining our Zoom journey. And I'm John Stansfield of Wild Connections. And we're going to have to hang our phone up. And with me is Allison Galensky on the controls. You've all been hearing Allison as you entered. And she's also, of course, a very big part of Wild Connections. Wild Connections is a science-based conservation organization that works to identify, protect, and restore lands on the Upper Arkansas and South Platte watersheds to ensure the survival of native species and ecological richness. We acknowledge that these watersheds are the ancestral lands of Ute, Cheyenne, Jicarilla, Apache, Arapaho, and other indigenous peoples. Allison?
Thank you, John. Just a few housekeeping things. I think all of you have heard me request that you turn off your camera and mute yourself during the program. If you have questions, please put them into the chat during the program or jot them down, and then after Mary completes her program and reading, then you'll have a chance. I can read the questions in the chat, or you can take yourself off mute and ask the questions. Appreciate everyone joining us, going to let Mary take it away. Thank you very much.
Okay, do you want me to introduce myself? And
Oh, no, actually, I'm on next.
oh, okay, I apologize.
Yeah, no, I didn't want to run over your feet at all. So here we go again. And this is John back again. And I say definitely that we are very grateful to have Mary Taylor Young with us tonight. She's a noted wildlife scientist, a really terrific educator, and an award-winning author of 22 books, including the official centennial history of Rocky Mountain National Park. So I hope I don't step on your feet here, really, Mary, but I'm saying Mary's today is going to introduce us to her newest book, The Timely Bluebird Seasons, Witnessing Climate Change, My Piece of the Wild. Go ahead, Mary.
Thanks very much, John. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so everybody can. Yeah, well, yay. Now we hope everything works.
Looks great to me.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera, and but I better not mute myself, or there's no point to this, right?
Please.
Do
not.
Okay, well, thanks so much for having me. It's really great to be sharing my personal journey with all of you folks who are like-minded with me and loving our natural world and concerned with our environment and the immense changes that are happening. So as John said, I've spent my career about 37 years as a nature writer in Colorado, and I've written about bats and birds, bears, lizards and snakes. I've done a lot of work on threatened and endangered species and wildlife research. I don't write technical work. I write for the general public, and I've always wanted to engage people to care about the natural world and wildlife as much as I do. And if people, when people care about something, they're moved to protect it. So that's been my mission and with all my writing. A few of my books might be familiar. The Guide to Colorado Birds. I did write the Rocky Mountain National Park Centennial book, the Rocky Mountain National Park, the first 100 years. And if you were a reader of the Rocky Mountain News, you might have seen my Words on Birds bird watching column that ran for 16 years. So after a career of all of that, this book is different than much of what I've written before. This is a very personal story. It's a special book to me. It's close to my heart. It's a story of a special place that to myself and my family that we've enjoyed for over 25 years, but now are concerned because of all the changes that we are seeing happening there. So what I like to ask you to do is, as I kind of take you on this journey with me, I hope that you will think about your own special wild place, whether it's your backyard, a local open space, someplace up in the mountains, and then think about the changes you're seeing and perhaps think about sharing your own story. So this all kind of begins back in 1995. My husband and I were living in Denver in a little old farmhouse, 100-year-old farmhouse in Denver, drinking coffee one summer morning, and I was looking through the Rocky Mountain News back when we all read newspapers, and there was an ad for land for sale in southern Colorado, west of Trinidad. And so I just impulsively said to my husband, let's go look at that. And he's a great guy, did one of those yes dear kind of things. And so we drove 3 hours down I-25 almost to New Mexico, and then west from Trinidad on Highway 12, about 12 miles. Now you might say, well, why did you drive 3 hours away to go look at land for sale? And the fact is very basic. We're just ordinary people, and the mountain land west of Denver was much too expensive for us to afford. And we wanted to get a little parcel of land. So we made that journey. And it's a very different landscape than the mountains west of Denver. Essentially, it's the foothills of the Sangre de Cristos, which are the most southerly range in the Rocky Mountains. It's a land where the primary forest is pinyon, pine, and juniper, and ponderosas grow where there's more moisture. And you can see from my photo here, this is one of our meadows. You can see many of you probably know that pinyon juniper is called PJ. I always love that. So there's the PJ, the sort of short, fat trees, and taller trees are the ponderosas where there's more moisture. It's land cut with meadows and rock tumbled canyons. So it's a very diverse landscape. And we just fell in love with it. Now, as a naturalist and a conservationist, I did wrestle with even the concept of buying land.
Excuse me, we're having a little technical difficulty. We're still seeing your first slide.
Oh, you are? Okay. Whoops. Did that advance?
No, you may need to restart the share.
Yeah, let me stop the share. Thanks for telling me. Okay, so let me. Can you see that?
So I'm still seeing just the first page, the first slide. You might need to share a different
All
window.
right.
Yeah.
Okay, let me start again. Shoot. No, it's not advancing at all.
Wouldn't be a real Zoom presentation without some technical difficulties.
I know. Darn, it was,
Maybe if you exit out of presentation mode.
okay. Yeah. All right, let me jump back here. Let me go back. All right, I'm gonna start over again. Okay, let's. Huh, that's so strange. It was advancing now. Now it won't advance. Okay, do you see that now?
Yay.
Okay, it worked.
Yes, it did.
Yay! That's
Great.
because I jumped up and down and turned clockwise twice.
Good job.
So anyway, okay, so here's this is a little photo of our landscape, and you might recognize that view. That's Fisher's Peak, the newest state park in the state park system. Anyway, so it's a diverse landscape with PJ forests, ponderosas, grassy meadows, and it's kind of cut by rocky, rough canyons. So with all that natural food, the pine nuts, juniper berries, acorns from oak brush, lots of bugs in those meadows. So it's really a rich habitat, supports a wonderful variety of not just birds, but all kinds of other wildlife, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, invertebrates. And so for a birder like myself, it was kind of a wonderland. And over the years, our bird list down there grew to over 200 species, probably about 240 to 250 that we saw on our land and in the surrounding area. And that list would get very interesting in coming years. Now, in that year, 1995, climate change was already well underway, but it really wasn't on my radar as a nature writer, and it wasn't generally on the radar of the public. It was on the way, but already there were reports like this from the British Meteorological Office that 1995 was the hottest year on record. Now, of course, we know that has been surpassed repeatedly. Every year now has been a hottest year, practically. And also that evidence was suggesting that there was a discernible human influence on the Earth's climate. I also, when I was researching my book, I came upon this quote that surprised me because if you look at the date, it's 1986. But Senator Chafee, in a Senate committee hearing, said, "This is not a matter of Chicken Little telling us the sky is falling. The scientific evidence is telling us we have a problem, a serious problem." Now think how many years ago that was, nearly 40 years ago. So very concerning. So after we bought our land, we immediately started camping down there and began to, immediately also to keep a nature journal. And at first it was just kind of a list of our sightings. Here's, I excerpted what, an early list of bird species. Nothing surprising really, just what you'd expect in that landscape. But of course, very quickly, we would just write down the fun, interesting things, the little anecdotal things we would see, like early morning in the meadow. A couple of coyotes were playing like Labrador retrievers, bowing down, play bow to each other, chasing and playing. We'd hear mountain lions screaming at night, find tracks in the mud, see bears, and lots of different birds, of course. And I always enjoy seeing what I call the unhuggables, invertebrates, lizards, amphibians. And one of our cool things we've seen is these hunting spiders that come out of the burrows in the ground. And the burrows entrances are about the size of a quarter, and they're perfectly round. And I remember one time a spider came out and her back was covered with dozens of tiny little spiderlets that she was carrying around on her back to keep them safe. So in 1998, our daughter Olivia was born, and by then our campsite had grown to be just so elaborate. We had our tent, and then we had a pup tent for our dogs. We had a picnic table and a canopy for the picnic table, and then a Coleman camp stove, and then a canopy for the Coleman camp stove. And it just got to be such an effort to put camp up and then take it down on every visit, because we just visited on weekends and, when we had vacation. And of course, we had to clean that campsite very well, so we didn't have problems with bears. So it just got to be too much work. So we decided in 1999 that we would build a log cabin. And again, just being average folks, we couldn't afford to pay somebody to come build us a cabin. So we decided to build it ourselves. And we recruited, all the friends and family that we could to come down. We had a 3-week window in June that we needed to build our cabin in, and then we had to get back to work. And so folks came down from a couple of days to a week, even 10 days. And that was the time of the solstice. So it was light till 9 o'clock at night, and we just work. But it was that really good kind of hard work where you're so exhausted, you're sweaty and dirty. And we put up solar showers. So, the water would warm up in the sun. Matter of fact, the water would be very hot by the end of the day. And then I would cook these big meals of spaghetti or stew for a group. And we'd sit around the campfire and eat our dinner and have a beer and swap stories and talk about the construction. It was just really a wonderful experience. And so this picture below is my father-in-law with our baby Olivia, who's 26 now. And then that's my husband Rick and myself. We're pounding the spikes in for a course of the logs. I do talk a little bit in the book about the process of building a cabin in that way. So it's quite a very fun experience. So like I say, it took us 3 weeks in June, and we had to get that cabin up, get the walls raised, get on the roof, the windows and doors, so we could lock it and drive away. And I like this picture of Olivia, the crew boss, telling everybody what to do. We even had a baby corral because several friends brought their little kids, and we'd take turns watching the kids. It was really fun. But anyway, we did it. We completed building our cabin so we could drive away. And we actually spent from July through about Thanksgiving of that year, finishing our internal, our internal finish work, putting up the walls and putting in flooring and It has a bathroom and a kitchen. I mean, friends go, wow, how rustic is it? But no, it's fully functional. Electricity and water, and we have a septic tank. Anyway, once we had built the log home for ourselves, we right away put up 4 nest boxes for bluebirds. So we built in 1999. In about February or March of 2000, we put up 4 bluebird nest boxes. And I'll give a shout out to the Colorado Bluebird Project and Kevin Corwin, because those are absolutely the best bluebird boxes. Because we lose 1 or 2 or more a year to bears, and we have to wire them back together, fix them, nail them, or buy new ones. We bought online, and the ones from the Colorado Bluebird Project are always the most productive boxes and the most durable. Eventually, we were maintaining a trail of 10 bluebird boxes, and my husband's an artist, so he did this little sketch of our property with the entrance gate at the bottom, and then we have a driveway that winds in about, I don't know, 1,000 feet maybe to the cabin, and which is the rectangle, and then the smaller squares are the boxes. So paying attention to the bluebirds and their lives became a very important part of our visits down to the cabin. Kind of a pole star for us for our world down there. You know, are the bluebirds back yet? And then checking the boxes, you know, is there any nesting going on? And then through the summer, taking a peek, keeping track of what boxes produced, how many babies, were there multiple clutches in boxes, and that kind of thing. Let's see. So if any of you maintain bluebird boxes, you know what a delight it can be. You don't want to disturb the birds, but you do want to find out what's going on with them. I've found that, so this is a Western bluebird female. When they're on eggs, I find they stay very, very tight to the nest. And then bluebird eggs are just lustrous and gorgeous. And then there's just nothing like the amazing sight of seeing new hatchlings and how they are triggered to respond to light and movement. You know, they rise up and raise up their heads and open their bill in that gape. And the adult, just that yellow circle of the hatchlings gape is just irresistible, and the adults start jamming bugs down there. So but anyway, paying attention to the bluebirds became really just so much fun and a focus for us. And then as it turned out, it became a barometer of what was happening down there and also more or less in nature. So the second year we put up a 5th box, and it would very quickly held a surprise, and that was not a bluebird family. It was a new species for us, the ash-throated flycatcher. Very common bird in that area, also a cavity nester. And the ash-throated flycatcher eggs are white with brown speckles, very different from bluebird eggs. Now, I could make some guesses what that white egg is, but I have no idea what that white egg is on top of those 6 flycatcher eggs. The next year we had another surprise. We had violet green swallows in one of our boxes. Such beautiful birds. I was delighted to have the swallows. We had, of course, seen them swooping around, hunting bugs over the meadows. But it was really fun to have them nest in the boxes. And then over the years, we've had a lot more surprises. We have mountain chickadees that nest in our boxes, white-breasted nuthatches, and lots of other non-bird surprises. Like sometimes there'll be a bunch of spiders. We've had many invasions by pinion mice. One time we opened a box to be greeted with a coiled up bull snake hissing at us. And then we've also had dummy nests built by wrens. The males will build multiple dummy nests, supposedly to impress a female with what a great nest builder they are, I guess. So for 15 years, mainly Western bluebirds and occasionally mountain bluebirds were the headliners that we had nesting in our boxes. And our meadows would just be filled with beautiful bluebirds flying back and forth, hovering, dropping into the grass to grab insects. And then when the babies would fledge, there'd be groups of speckle-breasted babies lined up on branches. And every time the adult would come in, they'd be squawking and screeching, feed me, feed me. And my image of them is always like teenagers who graduated from high school, but they're still sitting on the couch at home in front of TV, eating potato chips until the parents finally say, get a job. But over those years, as we kept track of what nests were in our boxes, bluebirds averaged 2/3 or roughly 66% of all our successful nests. Now that was beginning in 2000. But by 2017, things seemed to be changing. That was the last year that bluebirds made up even 50% of all our nests. Now, of course, the nest success moved up and down. That's, very natural cycles in nature. But by 2021, our bluebirds were down to averaging only 14% of our total nests. Now, remember, they used to be 66%. So they definitely seem to be on a downward trajectory. But the bird that was going the opposite direction were the ash-throated flycatchers. By that same year of 2017, the ash-throats were accounting for 40% of all our nests. Now, I can't say for sure what the reason for that is, but I definitely started to think it was probably linked to climate change. Ash-throats are arid country birds, and drier, warmer conditions favor them. Now, in 2019, National Audubon put out a report called Survival by Degrees, which is really a fascinating report. It's online. It's got a whole lot of interactive maps and information. They looked at all the nesting birds in North America. You can also look at the data by state. You can even zero in by county and by species, and they project how each species range will change over the years, like up to 2080, based upon whether we have a 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature rise or a 3-degree rise. And ash-throated populations are projected to remain stable and increase their summer range by 42. So numbers of the populations will remain stable, but they will increase their summer range by 42%, even under the most dire climate scenario. But Western bluebirds, they are projected to lose 35% of their summer range under the most dire climate. I thought that what we were seeing was starting to bear out some of these range changes that we were actually seeing on the ground in our little piece of the wild. And then those violet-green swallows, the Audubon report projects they will lose 42% of their summer range. And under that, they would disappear from our land. And as a side note, we have not had a confirmed swallow nest in any of our boxes since 2014. Now, it's important that I say that my journal entries are not based on rigorous scientific data. They're anecdotal, they're incomplete. We aren't down there every single weekend. Some summers we might be down there a lot. Other summers we might not be down as frequently. And also you have lots of variation season to season. But still, if I look, I've got 25 years of entries. And when I look at that, I felt I really could see definite trends in all these species. And for bluebirds, that trend is definitely downward. So there were other changes going on as well. And it was all recorded in my journal. In 2001, I was scrambling up a rocky cliff at the back of our land. We call it the Thumb. And we call it that because on the topo map, it's shaped like a thumbprint. And sometimes I laugh and say to my husband, why did we call it that? Why didn't we call it something dramatic, like Mount Massive, or, Colorado, we've got such great names, Lizard Head Peak and Mount Blue Sky, but no, ours is the Thumb. But anyway, I noticed something new, and that was I looked up at the top of the cliff, and silhouetted kind of like bones against the sky were a bunch of dead pinyon pines. Now we continued to notice more and more dead pinions, and when I tried to look into it, it took a few years till I could really find any information on it. Well, as it turns out, pinyon pine forests throughout the Southwest were being decimated by the Ips pine beetle. And of course, the pine beetle is a part of the natural community. They're always present in the pines, but drought was stressing and weakening the trees and making them less able to fight off the beetles. It's the same situation as the various other pine beetle infestations we have in Colorado in the West. And also over a century of wildfire control has made the forest grow too thickly. But anyway, some dry years, the pines down in our area were rated as having a lower moisture content than kiln-dried lumber. I found a report from the Forest Service on that. So that's pretty desperately dry. And drought hit our land too, as well, of course, just like all of Colorado and all of the West. There'd be some summers where our meadows would just be just a short, dry, brown, crackling grass, like in this picture. And when we would walk across the meadows, just dirt would puff up around our boots. Now, we do have an old stock pond up at the front of our land. And so this photo is a picture of, one of the drought years when the stock pond was completely dry. It's just fed by ephemeral, waterways, intermittent rainfall and all that. It still fills in a good wet year, and we'll have, we've even had herons on that pond, which is interesting. We also would more frequently see the glow of wildfires in the distance, and sometimes an oily fog of smoke would drift across and block out our view of Fisher's Peak, and also kind of fill our meadows. So there were a few kind of scary times when we had to make a decision whether to leave or not because of fire. So there were other changes going on that were reflected in our journal. And one of those changes was with the greater roadrunner, which is, such a fun bird. Everybody loves roadrunners. Now, southeastern Colorado is at the far northern part of that species range. So seeing them in southeastern Colorado and even around Trinidad is not unusual. I had seen one once down in Trinidad. But then a few years later, I saw one along the county road driving up to our place. And then I saw one in a meadow near our driveway. And then I started to hear neighbors talking about seeing roadrunners and making jokes about Wile E. Coyote and all of that. But to see a bird like that move upslope, our cabin is at about 6,700 feet in elevation. So to see that bird moving upslope is concerning. The Audubon report projects that under a 3-degree temperature rise, roadrunners will expand along the Front Range by 2080, almost as far as Denver. So that's quite interesting if we have roadrunners in Douglas County. Then another species saw significant change on was the scaled quail, the bird in the upper right-hand corner. Now, the scaled quail is a popular game bird in southeastern Colorado. That's a northern part of its range. They're common below 4,500 feet. They have been seen very rarely up to 5,500 feet. But in our journal, I had a record of we were out for a walk and we spooked a covey of scaled quail. And this was at 6,700 feet. So quite a bit higher than any of the records that I could find. And of course, if you spook a covey, that means you have nesting. That means those birds are moving upslope and they find suitable habitat that much higher for them. And again, they are dry country birds. So we also have always in the fall had wonderful collections of elk in our meadows, and we would always hear bugling. Typically the elks, as you know, spend summer in the high country, and then they move downslope to where it's warmer, where they can find grass through the winter. So our land west of Trinidad, the elk would move down, late September, October. And there were times we would have big gatherings of elk, but we began to realize that over the years, we felt like we were seeing less groups of elk. We even named the meadow out in front of our cabin. We call it Elk Meadow because we always had so many elk. And we said, gosh, we just don't hear bugling much these days. So the data for climate change effect on elk behavior is that as things are warmer, they're able to stay higher and find food later into the fall and winter. And there's all kinds of impacts to other species for them doing that. So it appeared that maybe we were seeing some of that as well. Another large mammal that we have a lot of are bears. And of course, bears enter hibernation in Colorado. It varies. It can be from October clear into early December, depending on food availability and temperature and that kind of thing. But we were finding evidence later and later into the season of active bears. I went through all our journals and picked out all the late season sightings of bears, but the most dramatic one, meaning that they were active and not hibernating. The most dramatic evidence, though, was a few years ago, I found fresh bear scat out by our cabin, and that was in January. Now, black bears do rouse from hibernation and emerge from the hibernation den, and they can be active and move around, but then they go back into the den. But what they don't do is start eating, because when they hibernate, they essentially rev down their digestive system. And when they actually fully emerge in the spring, it takes a while for their digestive tract to rev up again. So the fact that I found fresh scat meant that bear's digestive system had never geared down, that it had not gone into hibernation yet, and it was January. I thought that was pretty dramatic. And there also, Parks and Wildlife has studies that are showing bears are staying active later, and it's because of changing climate. But of all the species and the changes we were seeing, the most dramatic and most evident to us were changes with hummingbirds. Our dominant, most evident hummingbird from the beginning was our wonderful broad-tailed hummingbird, the bird that trills and whistles, bird on the left, which as Coloradans, all of you are familiar with and probably love the broadtail. So for many years, that was a primary hummingbird that we saw down at our cabin. We also had black-chinned hummingbirds, which is the bird on the lower right. They're a little bit larger. They don't whistle and trill, but they do hum quite loudly. And the male has a purple gorget, but they were not as common. Now, the black-chinned is a southern Colorado hummingbird, but that's again at the northern part of their range. They're more of, I have a friend from Arizona and he says, oh yeah, that's a desert hummingbird, because I guess they had them around their house in Arizona, but they're more south ranging. Now over the years, we began to see fewer broadtails at our feeders and greater numbers of black chins, until our journal entries are saying didn't see any broadtails until day 2, or finally saw a broadtail at the feeder, or it's all black chins these days. So those kinds of entries. So I looked at the survival by degrees report, and they list broad-tailed hummingbirds as a bird of highest vulnerability to climate change. They could lose up to 69% of their range across North America, and including 19, they would disappear from 19% of Colorado, including our land, by 2080, as a warming climate pushes them up just into the highest, coolest elevations of the mountains. But the black-chinned is already expanding its range into Colorado, and this report from 2015 said the unassuming black-chinned hummingbird is thought to have begun a climate-mediated range shift already. And we felt that we are definitely seeing that happening on our land. They are projected, black-chinned hummingbirds are projected to expand their summer range by 62%. That would bring them to across almost all of the state of Colorado. That makes me very sad to think of losing broadtails. Now, in about 2012, I had started thinking about writing a book about our cabin and our land and all our stories we had in our journals. And I was going to call it Bluebird Season. And it was going to be a nice little nature book about the joy and renewal of nature, and how important it is, how restorative it is. But then as I began to go back through 20 plus years of nature journal entries, I realized that those entries had a secret winding all the way through them. And that was evidence of a warming climate. That we had unknowingly captured the evidence of climate change in our journals, as if our sightings were the raw data of climate change. And that's when I realized that the story to tell was about change. So my nice little nature book, Bluebird Season, became Bluebird Seasons, about changes that are evident only by watching one piece of land over many years and many seasons. I didn't set out to become a witness to climate change, but if I had, I felt like I couldn't have picked a piece of land that better represented all the many chapters of the climate change story, as if our land told that saga in microcosm. There's been a century of fossil fuel extraction in that area because of coal mining. We have extremes of weather. We have severe drought. We have increasing wildfires and species change. And it's interesting to me that the fact that this landscape that is showing so much of the impact of climate change was also a party to creating it. So as I said, there's been coal mining going on down there for 100 years. Our land's in an area of southern Colorado known as the Raton Basin. It's now an area of huge natural gas extraction. We have a gas well on the property right next to us. And over the years, we used to all the ridges around us were just dark at night and had no evidence of anything. But now it's like sometimes I think they're like crisscrossed with almost like whip marks, as gas well roads are more and more built on all those ridges. So I looked at the property up on Google Earth, and in this picture, our land is kind of in the middle there. And I counted 264 gas wells within a 5-mile radius. Now the gas wells are the little white circles, that's the gas pad. Then they have to build an access driveway, and then they have to have interconnecting roads. And to me, when I saw it from space on Google Earth, it looked like the hyphae of fungi that were spreading across the landscape, which also was, to my mind, a good metaphor for that. I estimated the land, I added up I knew the average diameter of the well pads, how long the access driveways were, how I measured all the roads, and I added it all up and did a little rough and dirty math and came up to 115 acres of land that had been converted in this picture to gas wells and the access roads. But that's not 115 acres just in one circle. That's spread out across 5 miles, 5 square miles. So not only is that a loss of green vegetation that takes up carbon and emits oxygen and provides habitat for wildlife, but it also fragments that habitat and it creates barriers to wildlife movement. So that's another one of the downsides of fossil fuel extraction. And you probably have heard that our current climate crisis is viewed as probably or possibly bringing on the 6th mass extinction in Earth's history. And the 5th mass extinction was 66 million years ago when a massive asteroid struck Earth, changed the climate by throwing immense amounts of debris and vapor and rock dust, et cetera, to that blocked out the sun and changed the climate and wiped out the dinosaurs. So when all of that debris eventually settled out of the atmosphere and over millions of years as it was compressed geologically, it left a thin, chalky geologic layer that today is called the KPG boundary. You may have heard it called the KT boundary, but that's kind of apparently a dated term. K stands for Cretaceous, as in the Cretaceous era, which was the last era of the dinosaurs. And PG stands for Paleogene. So the reason I mention that is that this layer is visible not in many places on Earth. It's there, it just isn't eroded and visible. But a number of the spots to see it are right near our cabin, like about 1.5 miles down the hill in Trinidad Lake State Park. There is an exposed part of the KPG boundary. So that's me pointing out the boundary, but the immense drama of what this represents. I put my hand over that black coal below the boundary, and it's like, this is the dinosaurs. This is the era when these immense, amazing life forms were dominant. And then I put my hand on the sandstone above, because below the boundary are all the fossils of dinosaurs and the plants of that era, but above there are no fossils of dinosaurs. And it was just represents such an immense change. But really what happened is that asteroid caused immense climate change, blacked out the sun, and the plants died, and then the animals that ate the plants died, and then the animals that ate the plant eaters died. And that's how it became a mass extinction. But I say that if I'm a witness to climate change, I'm also a witness to many lessons that can help us face this, because our journals are full of countless stories of recovery and renewal. We've had bad years when all the nests failed, or we would find clutches of babies dead in the nests. But those would be followed by good years where we had multiple clutches of baby birds thriving in all of our boxes. And so I realized when I was writing my book that it might seem to be a story of loss, but actually it's a story of hope. Because though my piece of the wild's under grave threat, it's also still a place of wonders and a place of joy and renewal. Now, early last spring, just at the beginning of the nesting season, we were down at the cabin. New growth was starting to come up through the dead, dry meadow grasses. Wildflowers were starting to bloom, and the bluebirds were back, and they were back to carry on with the process of carrying on. We checked our nest boxes, and one of them already had a lovely new bluebird nest, and it held 4 lustrous blue eggs. And in spite of the drought and wildfire and all the changes, the bluebirds were still back. They still return every spring, and they get on with the business of life. So to me, it was like, well, the bluebirds aren't giving up, and we can't give up either, and we can't be fatalistic, because there's still so much to have hope for. There's just too much to be done, and so many things that we can do to make sure that we have endless bluebird seasons going into the future. So I see hope in three basic areas. The first is in the passion of youth. I mean, young people, this is their future. I have a 26-year-old. She and all her friends are determined to change the world and have a future. They're also, young people are leading the activism on climate change. So I see great hope in that. I also see hope in the ability of humans to overcome enormous challenges. When we look at the things people have managed to achieve despite unbelievable odds, humans, when we set ourselves to it, are capable of amazing things. And last of all is nature's resilience. All of us interested in the environment, interested in nature, we see that over and over again, that given a chance, nature will persist and it will survive. My book doesn't give you a list of actions to take that you can do to fight climate change. You can find that in a simple Google search. I do have a link on my website to 12 things you can do in your own life to help. But and I also am not an expert on climate change. I'm a biologist and a writer, not a climatologist. But what I am is a witness, and I pay attention. And all of you are witnesses also. And that's what we can do. So by sharing my climate change story, I also, again, urge everybody to look around in your favorite wild place in your backyard, your favorite stream you like to fish, maybe Rocky Mountain National Park, what's changing there. Recognize it, and then share your story too. Because if we all are witnesses and speak up and share our stories, we give ourselves a voice. And so we can be a part to beginning to battle the climate change crisis. So before I see if you all have some questions, I'd just like to do a short reading from the book. Cabin Journal, October 1999, 9 p.m. From the dark meadow, we hear a high-pitched moaning, then bleating and mewing like souls lost in the night. Suddenly nearby, from the south, a distinct elk bugle. We turn off the cabin lights and quietly, gently ease open the door onto the porch. The autumn night pulses with music. Coyotes perform from near in the arroyo and far down Long Canyon as the song dogs gather for their nightly sing. A great horned owl hoots from the tall ponderosas below Rattlesnake Ridge. Farther off, to the east, comes the whinny of a western screech owl, accelerating and dropping in pitch like a ball bouncing down a flight of stairs. And from our meadow, those high-pitched moans that perplex us. A waxing half moon brightens the night, and through binoculars we make out the movement of phantoms in our meadow. Large shapes, small shapes, elk. We estimate 40 to 50 animals. The cows call to their calves with mews and bleats. To the east, to the west, the bugles of bull elk, starting low, then rising to a high-pitched screech, tapering off to chuffs and whuffs. Such a bizarre sound for animals weighing 900 pounds. Then comes a clattering sound. Is it the clashing of antlers as two bulls spar? Elk cows gather in nursery herds with their calves and yearlings, feeding on the lush grass of our meadow. It's the fall rut, and the bull elk are drawn here by the presence of female elk. Some of the calves and the yearlings may be their young from prior years. In this season, the bulls are impelled by the rise of hormones, their necks swollen, their antlers polished and gleaming. We often find the downed remains of low-hanging pine boughs thrashed by them in mock combat as they struggle to release some of the energy and mating angst that drives them. They bugle to lure females, expending great energy to impress the cows with their size, their suitability as sires for the young that the females will carry through winter and bear next spring. In some hard winters, exhausted by the rut, weak from spending too little time feeding, bull elk do not survive. They literally die for love. But if they have mated with one or more cows, their genes will carry on, and they will have succeeded in the ultimate game of life. We watch in silence this drama of phantoms, milling shapes, indistinct in the moonlight, filling our meadow. The music of elk families, the bellows of hormone-driven males. Then, after some time, who knows what triggers it, some slight creak of the porch floorboards, the faintest of our whispers, barely heard but different from the natural music of the night, or our scent carried by the slight breeze. But they are suddenly all looking at us. Dozens of heads turned our way at the same exact angle as if aligned by a carpenter's square. Then a bull blasts a warning scream, and they are all running west into the timber. An explosion. We hear a frantic jostling of large bodies, faint whimpers of alarm, the calls of mothers to their young. The trampling clatter of solid hooves across fallen trees at the base of Elk Ridge, incredibly loud as stealth is abandoned. The thudding rhythm of those same hooves running up through the pines, up a trail that in the next day's sunlight we will find newly churned by the pounding of many hooves. They flee, mama cows and antlered bulls, spike bull yearlings, and many small calves. In moments, the noise has faded up the ridge and the meadow is nearly empty, but not quite. Left behind are 2 or 3 young calves, confused, bleating plaintively for their mothers. But finally, they are gone too, whether instinctively following their clan up the ridge or rescued by their mothers. It is too dark for me to know. And the meadow is once again quiet, filled only with moonlight. So thank you. I'll stop sharing my screen, and I'll welcome to take some questions.
Why don't you turn on your video?
There I am.
And yes, I invite people to put questions into the chat.
Okay.
Just in case some folks need to leave at the top of the hour, wanted to let everyone know that we will be having another presentation, another Witness to Climate Change on Thursday, March 28th. Carl Ford will be talking about his new book, The Colorado Trail in Crisis, a naturalist's field report on climate change in mountain ecosystems. And you can learn more about that once we get our webpage, the Wild Connection webpage, updated with that information. And it's the information. We have thanks from several participants for your talk.
Thank you.
As people are thinking about questions and maybe putting them in, I did have one myself. I'm curious about how climate change is impacting biodiversity. So I was wondering if you thought that, you talked about some species were new species that you were seeing in your area and some that you weren't seeing as much anymore. Do you think the number of species is staying fairly steady? Do you think the number of individuals are staying steady, or do you think they're going down?
That's a great question. That's again, my data would be anecdotal. We do see different numbers. I feel lowering numbers of some species. It's a little hard to know though what's that caused by. For example, if we're seeing fewer elk, is it just because they aren't there? They're just staying higher. In terms of overall biodiversity, of course, the things that humans have a hard time paying attention to and seeing are invertebrates and the microbiome, and almost certainly that those communities of organisms are very impacted by all these changes going on. I mean, to me, all of you, everybody who pays attention, all of us, I care about the environment. We know that it's much, much more complex and so much more going on in complicated ways humans have barely even begun to understand. And yet we have made these massive changes. I saw some figures recently that 96% of all the mammalian biomass on Earth, in other words, all the mammal bodies, 96% are humans and their domestic animals. 96%. That means everything else fits in 4%. All the, the elephants and the orangutans and all the mice, there's lots of mice, they all just make up the other 4%, which is pretty darn stunning. So anyway, I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. No, great response. Have a question from Jim. Is your cabin near Bosque del Oso? Wild Connections did some surveying down there about 20 years ago.
We're actually a downslope down Highway 12 from the Bosque del Oso. A lot of the elk that winter at our elevation, a lot of them are summering up the Bosque and further west and higher. So, gosh, you know what? I can't think of exactly the mileage, but it's a couple. I mean, we've gone up and we would go up there occasionally and go birding or hiking. And say it's a couple-hour drive, maybe. But yes, very good call. We're just down from there.
Have a question from Weston. First of all, wonderful writing a nature summary.
Thank
But
you.
what hope the natural world will survive, only move northward as it warms, but will just a culture survive the loss of crops and the movement of disease north as well?
Well, all of these things are on track to happen or be increasing. I actually have a whole chapter devoted to increase in disease. I base it on the fact that we had a ginormous mouse invasion after we had a 4-foot winter snow down there. And I wasn't very, very concerned about hantavirus. But there's a lot of different diseases that are moving. Temperature and climate barriers kept a lot of diseases away from Colorado and northern areas, but now that's changing. So I think we're learning that the impacts are much more widespread and happening more quickly than the early modeling was telling us. So I guess I would say it can be very difficult to maintain hope. But the thing is, what else are you going to do? I mean, honestly, it was kind of a little bit, I spent the I wrote this book in about, about 8 months. And I was reading every climate change reports that were coming out weekly, updated data, and it was very hard to not just be in an existential funk the whole time. But the reality is, we can't give up. We have to have hope and we have to do everything we can. What we're lacking, I know probably all of you know this, is political will. We have the means to mitigate climate change, but we just need to be able to move society in our country and globally. And it's a pretty big task. But what all of us who are paying attention and care, we have to, we have to keep spreading the word. We have to do what we can and be active. So it's not time to throw in the towel yet. And anybody who has kids and grandkids, if you love them, you can't throw in the towel. So.
A little bit of hope from, the Colorado College puts out a survey every year of conservation across the West. And I just saw a presentation of the most recent survey. And the first time I heard about this was maybe 10 years ago or more. And climate change was very partisan back then, and there were a whole lot of people who didn't think it was an issue, and steadily the knowledge of the issue has been increasing, the acceptance that there is an issue among the general public, getting away from people who have, a financial reason to downplay. So there's
Yeah.
perhaps the political will can follow the will of the people.
Well, that's where I think what so many of us, I mean, all of us recycling and buying an electric vehicle is not going to save the earth. But one of the most powerful tools we have is story. Because how do those people who shame the concept of climate change, but if you share a story, story is the way humans have always related to their world and to each other. And it's a powerful tool that we have. And that's why, my book is my personal story. I'm not a climatologist. I'm like, okay, I can read all this stuff and I'm like, oh my gosh, that sounds terrible. Then I look around me, I go, I'm seeing it. So if we can all, that's one of the many things that we can use, but I think it's a very powerful thing that we can do and try to persuade people instead of, we all know in this country so divided, we can't stand and yell and scream at each other, that all of us just entrench further in our viewpoint. So
Well, I appreciate especially a strong storytelling view.
very
The
true.
other comments you might want to look at, because we have good comments about praise for your presentation and
Yeah, I was just taking a peek at some of these. It's
inspiration.
kind of hard to look at when you're presenting. It's a little hard to look at comments, but I thank everybody for these. I really, really appreciate your comments. And Susan, you said you're inspired to journal your own observations. That's wonderful. I mean, for telling your story and also what it does for yourself personally. Oh, Lisa, you said the largest elk herd you've seen is near Stonewall. Yeah. That's beautiful, beautiful country. Anyway, so I really thank everybody for your comments and I'm glad you enjoyed it and haven't been
John,
able to
did
go
you
through.
have any closing remarks, or you'll need to turn your camera back on? I turned it off for you. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Barry, for joining us. We will send out an email follow-up with a link to the recording. And please check out Wild Connections web page and check out Barry Young's web page, and have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you.